in this second session, Rod is uh, taking a chart that I've given you, and it's somebody I don't know particularly well, but it's a chart that I thought was interesting and that would be of interest to you. And so, Rod, guide us through where you'd start, what you'd prioritize, and how you might wish to articulate some of the placements.
So if I haven't seen a client before, I am going to give them a little bit of introductory chat, really mostly to make them feel comfortable. So I'll spend about the first 5 minutes. I might say the odd joke, or I might just, still speak very generally about astrology, just to get them settled, to see that I'm not wearing a wizard hat with stars and moons on it, and just to adjust to the situation and realize this is all fine and normal and good. In the case of, in fact, someone like Martha, though, so I'll also adapt my approach, usually to suit the ascendant of the chart. So I'll also look at the ascendant and think, what approach am I going to need for this person? And, she's not likely to be very forthcoming, as the Scorpio ascendant and Sun and Saturn sitting right there. So I know it's going to be a little bit harder to break the ice, probably, and perhaps a little bit harder to make her feel more comfortable. So I'll be a little prepared for that. Experience as an astrologer has taught me that at this age, if I was seeing her now and she's 64, that's mellowed a lot. And eventually that first house sun, as a happy, we're all drawn to the sun, is more likely to be there. So I'm not too worried because she's older, but I'm a little prepared to do some extra work in that way. Astrologically, I've spent all my preparation time really just concentrating on the planets. As a traditional astrologer, I guess, I was avoiding using the label because it's clearly not just that. But anyway, as trained that way, I look at each planet and their rulerships in the chart. In other words, what their dignities are. I use essential dignity and what they rule by house. And so I get a strong sense for each planet. What is it about? Is it a mostly good or mostly harmful planet? And what is it mostly in charge of? When I say mostly, is because the challenge with traditional approach is that you very strongly use both the natural significations of that planet, like Venus is love, and you use the specific ones, which houses she rules in the chart, which could be anything. And those are equally important, if not the fact that rulership, accidental dignity, is in fact more important, traditionally speaking, because it's what makes one chart different from another. And clearly their focus was always very much about this person, nothing general. They didn't have the idea of sun signs even. So that is a strong influence on me as well. So that's why I'm so focused around that, prepared that whenever I say something about a planet, I'm aware of that. I want to clarify what I mean by mostly good or mostly harmful. The approach that I take is, and what I teach my students, is that think of every planet like a bright and shiny, wonderful car. And as it gets detrimented or combust or all these astrological problems, it gets various dents and bumps and scratches and all of that. At the end of the day, it's still going to be a car, it's still going to be driving. It's not a beautiful, perfect car anymore. It's got all these other things going on, but it's still a car, and eventually it's going to get you there, because that's what cars do. And that is the function of the planets. It's that if you try and be as conscious as possible and use them as much as possible, they will eventually get you there, even if they are detrimental. So when I say mostly harmful, I don't mean, oh dear, it's out to get you. I just mean these are the ones that are going to require a lot of the work, or things need to be done more than once, which is often their problem. I think harmful mostly means that and delayed.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Do you want me to go on particularly about Martha, how I would approach her?
If you're happy to, that would be great. Yeah.
I'm happy to. So as I said, then in order to lighten the mood, if necessary, I might make a joke about Scorpio, for example. I won't say something mean and horrible, like your manipulative type joke. I'll say, whenever I see someone's a Scorpio, I'm expecting to find someone dark and mysterious. I use one of those kind of cliches, the appearance ones for Scorpio, to give her a chance to laugh or to make an innocuous remark herself or anything that establishes it, lets me say I'm in the know. If she's not wearing black, I might say I was expecting you to wear black. She is wearing black. I bet I'll say something like, even though I know you're going to tell me you borrowed these clothes and you don't have any other black clothes, I bet you're always wearing black. Or something like that, which is just a silly statement. But as I said, it breaks the ice and lets us actually get right into Scorpio. So if we on the page of why we're here, and let's get comfortable about this. So what I will also do is, especially for someone of Martha's age, the generalizations that I then make astrologically at the beginning will be about time. They're not about the chart. I don't go in the shapes of the chart and things like that. I'll talk about knowing what age she is. I know that she's just about to have her Uranus square. Major cycle for her age group. Also reminds us of the very importance of the outer planets as timing things, as changing things. They're indispensable. The ancients had nothing on that. So, and that one's quite important, the 21-ish cycle of Uranus. So by seeing her age, I know that it's around the corner before I've even checked the chart. So I'll contextualize a little bit for her by at first talking about the 3 ages or 4 ages of astrology, which are the 29, 30-year cycles. So I'll simply say something like, so, in astrology, around about the age of 60, you enter the eldership. You're now in the time of your life where you get to perhaps call the shots a little bit, or perhaps attend to your own needs more than worrying about everyone else's. It's in some ways going to be the years when we finally get to confront who we are and what we want to do. And it actually takes until somewhere in the early 60s to do that, because there's a 21 or 22-year cycle of individuality. And I'm saying all of this because you're now reaching the point where you've made the transition into the senior years, and you're now facing with, who am I? What am I doing in this chapter of my life? What is this version of me? I'll also say to them what these 21-year cycles are really all about are getting us back onto the track of, in some ways, who we've always known ourselves to be. Then depending if she then picks up on me, if I'm going to take that into a little bit more of a conversation, I'd say something like, because this suits Martha's chart, I'd say something like, because even since you were little, even in a naive way, but you've always had a sense of who you are. I know that because of Martha's Saturn right there on the ascendant, right on her sun, and her Capricorn moon, she's been an adult since she was very little. So she must have had some kind of inner sensibility of who she is, in a childish way, of course, not in some necessarily insightful way, but certainly a childish way of, I'm me, I'm going in some direction. It might not even be an ambition, just in the way that an adult has that. But unquestioning, unlike an adult. And now's the time when those kind of things come back onto the plate. And when again you're addressing, who am I and how do I be me? And under this 21-year cycle, it's often an exciting opportunity to do that. Occasionally it brings changes we don't want, not usually at this age. That's usually at the middle of life. But this time it's really about, what the hell, I'm going to do what I like. I might even remind them that many of their peers have unexpectedly started doing tertiary degrees. And that's an example of when in their 60s, suddenly they get themselves back onto what they always wanted to do, or even if it's a bucket list item. So I'm contextualizing also, perhaps if necessary for her, why it's taken so long to get the 3rd chapter underway. Because it's an interesting thing how people's expectations and beliefs about their life are so age related. And that's why I always go there. For me, the cycles are very important. It was my first book, actually, on astrology, was on the cycles of Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, and how they time big things in our lives. So that's why I'll generally go there with someone like her, who's got a very strong Saturn. It's kind of all over her. The traditional part of me will take it as far as even saying, so I'll start off speaking about the Scorpio. I'll say you probably do find yourself to be quite a typical Scorpio, even if that's only in the way of tending to be quite reserved and watching. And what Scorpios often feel, I'll say to her, is as if they're observing rather than taking part in. And the reason for that is because, and then I'll take her to, you know that Scorpio is often depicted as a scorpion, and that you hear all that stuff about stings. Well, to astrologers, Scorpio is really an eagle. And if you think about an eagle, this is an animal that flies above the world and is in a world of its own where it must be dead silent and it's separated from everything else. But when it sees what it needs, that little field mouse all the way down there, it will zap right down exactly there, take the mouse and cause no collateral damage. The function of Scorpio is to know where she has to intervene, because Scorpio's role in the world in the end is to act as the catalyst for other people's changes. And I'm taking that role of Scorpio also because it's her rising sign, and through the rising sign we also act on the world. It's not all behind the scenes. So I'll say in the end that's going to be the role. When you were younger, they might have thought you were manipulating or pressing the button, but in the end that's what it's about. And that's why an eagle needs these eyes that only work from a great distance in order to do that. In order to zoom in and have lenses like that, an eagle needs to step away. And that's what the Scorpio does. So sometimes when you feel as if you're an observer amongst your friends, they're all acting as if they've lost their inhibitions and you're not feeling that way, whatever it may be, it's that. It can be also then related to the fact that you've always been a bit of an adult, because you are the more serious kind of Scorpion. I'll start just planting some seeds about Saturn, which we're bound to come back to pretty soon in this reading, but just by saying, you know, you've been like an adult since you're early in life anyway. So in some senses, you've known what you've wanted. This particular chart, you know, by looking at the chart in my preparation phase, I know that, you know, she's got the strong angular Saturn and the angular Pluto. And the interesting thing about Pluto, I find, is that I'll always talk about it by house, but it's important not to get people hysterical about anything they hear about Pluto, because, you know, all our generation have it in a similar position and all of those. And I don't want them to feel as if Pluto's personally out to get them, unless it really is. So mostly I'm not going to get too far into worrying about Pluto too soon. But in this chart, I'd immediately think this is the one that's got a personal Pluto because it's angular. And angular will refer to those things that either are hard to change or can't be changed, or that are just big, in the end, milestone events in their lives. But I know with Martha, as I said, so everything's from very early on in life. Everything close to the angles is very early on in life. So I expect that from an early life, either by her experience, which is really her parents' experience, or for, I guess, reasons of her own, but she'd still, I know, be able to get there to early life. So I guess the one kind of in the know thing I am doing to her, but not trying to make her think I'm the only one who knows, is that I can see that from a very early time, you've been this serious adult, Martha. You've known yourself that way. And in that sense, although, as I said, I would never use the phrase no one else understands you, because it isn't that. It's that it makes you a little different in a specific way. Everyone's different in some way. Your specific difference is you're more serious and adult as a child. And you might find that as an adult, and I'm actually talking about the Pluto now, despite having been adult your whole life, it's harder for you to like settle into a job or know exactly, this is my path in life. This is Pluto in the 10th house. It's the other angle. I'm not here talking about Pluto as anything challenging and traumatic. I'm simply saying, despite being an adult, it's unsettling. There's this thing about your chart that is, you're adult from the very beginning, but it's still going to take you quite a while to figure out how your direction works. And what I hope I've done by telling her that is that essentially that it's okay. Something I will often say directly to a client, especially if they're young, is that the astrology doesn't have any part in astrology. Sorry, in astrology, there's no concept of you're doing it wrong, really. This is who you are. This is who you're born to be. You can't possibly be someone else. In the same way that a rose can only be a rose. A rose might sit there thinking, what if I'm supposed to be a dandelion? Well, when am I supposed to flower? Will they come and tell me when to flower? What if I don't? What if I miss it? It can sit there and drive itself nuts, but it's going to flower at the right time as if by magic. And what it should be worrying about is, I'm going to try and be the best rose I know how to be. I'm going to eat the right foods that I smell fantastic. I'm going to only allow quality bees to come and look at my wares. You know, it's got power over a lot of those things instead of worrying about daffodils, which is irrelevant to the rose. And in many ways, we're the same. We're going to be who we are, like it or not. So your best option is to take it into your own hands and make it as good as it's possible. So I'll sometimes say to them that it's really just a mirror. You won't hear anything you don't already know. And that's why I know it's safe to talk about anything. But like a mirror, the mirror doesn't say, go and change your hair, because it can't. It'll say, go and brush your hair, because you can. And then you'll get the job, and then you'll get the date. All about brushing your hair. You never changed one hair, Gene. But tomorrow you're going to have to brush your hair again, because it's like it's never happened before. And the same is with the chart. So I can tell you about why you hold yourself back, or whatever it may be. You won't change yourself, but you can master yourself. Because by free will, we have the power not to go down that road, even if it kills me. Because that's what consciousness allows us to do. An alcoholic doesn't stop wanting to drink. But if they stop drinking, then they have a fantastic life. So there is a lot of power in will and consciousness. So that's where, by making her conscious right from the beginning, this is the unique you. You're not wrong by not finding your path. It wasn't wrong that whatever happened in your parents' life affected you that way. I don't even go down that road. I can recommend a good therapist if you do, because I haven't said that. But it's more like, I know that there's stuff perhaps in her early life that she might want to talk about, why she's like an adult from the beginning. We don't have to go there, though. She just mostly needs to know it's actually totally fine. Your parents didn't harm you. It wouldn't, only if that didn't happen. And in most cases, and this is another thing I always tell my students, most people's lives aren't actually soap operas, even though it feels a little bit like it at the time. Mostly things are fairly mundane and not out of proportion. So you don't have to look in Saturn on the sun and think, oh my God, child abuse, all of this. There's no reason to go there. That's a very small percentage of people, and that she will raise if she needs to raise. You can just give her the signs, and if she wants to go there, she will. So you can say there are early life things that make you more like an adult, that might make it seem to you as if it's delayed some of your progress in life. But actually it's the nature of your chart. And if it came through parents who they were all at work and they never paid attention, or whatever it might have been, in the end, it actually serves who you need to be. Those are the limits that you needed to work with to be able to be you. And in the end, you know, it's like, if we live long enough, I sometimes say that just as a joke, but that is what the ancients thought. If we live long enough, everything can work out even quite well, even if it's detrimented. So it's that application. So I've now made her feel that she's okay, that it's normal, that there might have been delays or obstacles or restrictions, and it's possible that we've gone further into that conversation, depending on what came back from her, about the hints I've made about that. People often want to talk about professional things very early on. These days, that could still be true for someone of her age. Hasn't always been the case. Yeah. And that's an interesting thing. I've seen a lot of change in my 30 years practicing, is the rapid change of the older generation. You know, so, and I find nowadays people in their 50s and sometimes in their 60s a bit more confused than they used to be, because they used to be clear in the past of now comes retirement. You know exactly what's coming next and what to do and what you've planned and all of those things. But nowadays it doesn't anymore. And people do stuff more and they live longer and they can do all these things and they just don't want to do that same office job they've been doing for 30 years. So they're a little bit more in the air. So it's possible, depending on her, that we've still got some more to talk about. However, anyway, with someone with Pluto in the 10th and Jupiter in Virgo. So Jupiter detrimented, as I always tell my students, it's still Jupiter, it'll try. But often as a detrimented planet, things fall apart or they fizzle out or something like that, especially the younger we are, because things improve with time. So this is all delayed along with Pluto. Pluto's effect in the 10th house seems to be to let a person take something to the maximum and then they have to go somewhere else, whether they're interested in something else, where the circumstances change it, doesn't matter, off they go in the next direction. And that's what creates some of that unsettlement. So I'll discuss that with her. I'll ask her if that's been a history, that, you know, it's not that it's like she takes something to its maximum, even squeezes the last drop out of it and then goes off and does something completely different. And that can make her feel as if she's not going anywhere or doing anything. So it's possible that once she's in her 60s, she is finally on her path. So as I said, at this age, I'd have to adapt to how she's managing to play it. But I would expect, given that it's now, given her Pluto in the 10th house anyway, that she'll keep on with her mission, whatever. And what I'm trying to do is frame it, if you like, as this scorpionic thing with a double Scorpio of being the catalyst and agent of other people's change. Because that's a lot of what's powerful about this chart, and also true for the sun in the first house. The sun in the first house will give her the ability to, like, relatively easily look at other people's lives and see it quite clearly. Because it's like, I'll say to her, your chart's got, it's almost like you've got a spotlight on your head, that when you look at other people's stuff, it's all lit up. It doesn't mean when you look at your own stuff it's lit up, but it certainly means when you look outside of you. So things that people should do or that might be true, whatever, might seem very obvious to you. And you can turn that into a skill. And so this other thing I often tell my clients is that the ancients believed, having said that, we're born to be exactly this person. There's no other person you can be. So be this as best as you can. They also said that we're all supposed to be prostitutes. And they look at me with alarm for 1 second. And then I say it's because they said that you've got to sell what you were born with, the stuff that was given to you for free. So the universe, the earth is seemingly very unfair. It's a very unlevel playing field. But actually the fair part is that we're all born with at least a baseline of skills or talents. Could be your hands, could be your head, could be your eyes, could be your brain, could be a bunch of other things that at least gets the ball rolling. After that, a lot of it's up to you, and education and all of those things have to happen. But you get this baseline of where you can start that's free, that'll actually put a roof over your head and money and food in your mouth with nothing else except you were born that way. And if you can find a way to turn that into a highly paid professional skill, you are getting off the lightest way on this planet. That's our aim, is to let them pay you for something that you were born able to do, that you love to do, that if they weren't paying you, you would do, that if you were in your room the whole day and would know where to find you, that was the thing you were doing. Let them pay you for that. That's what's fair about this world, and that can take you very far. And but that's often why people think that they're faking it when they do a job, or that I'm not really an expert, I've always done this, and those things that people say. And that's why we have this chart. It says this who you are, that's all you can be, so sell that. And the good thing about selling that as a Scorpio is that it helps you keep out of the trouble that younger Scorpios like you have, in that you often, because you see their lives so clearly, you might sometimes put it a little bit too clearly. It can be tactlessness. Mostly I would say Mars would be more tactless, and she doesn't have that kind of a Mars, but she's got the bluntness of an adult. So you might be blunt or clear or not realize that they don't see it as clearly. You're not being manipulative or too pointed, but you might sometimes just be a little bit too clear, is how I would say it for her. when you're young. If you can get paid to be clear, that's a completely different story. So if you're a psychologist, this is a great chart for all that, Scorpio for that. Or if you're in a setting where you in a leadership role or taking care of lots of people, because she has Leo in the midheaven with the sun in the first house. So she could be using her leadership skills very powerfully. In any of those events, people will pay you very highly to be clear and make the very clear point of what we need to do here and how to act as the catalyst. In fact, she's got a great chart for that. The kind of professions are those either where she's in that leadership role or in a like film director role where she's the center of the hub and she can see everyone else's talents and has to get them all together and say, you'll need to do that and you can handle that. And that kind of seeing it all very clearly and catalyzing it or gestalting it into something more like a movie director does. But preferably something that isn't corporate like that at all and is her stuff. Because that same sun on the 10th, ruling the 10th from the first house, makes her profession very personal. And Pluto in the 10th says, don't really try and follow the world because it's probably not going to work easily for you. That's why she's unsettled in the world. So she needs to ideally be in a more individual role where she can act as the catalyst for others, hence the psychologist or healer or some form of therapist in that way, or coach or what's the word I'm looking for, like a consultant. But it would have to be on something a little bit more deep and meaningful for her, I'd assume. So to turn all that serious and Scorpio stuff into something that's paid for and celebrated. Because the good thing about having the sun in the first house is that it's not so hard for people to like you. I won't comment that I'm thinking to myself, with Scorpio and Saturn as part of that equation, I wonder really. But what is true about the sun in the first house is that people are drawn to these people. And they can be amazing and they can be warm. I mean, it's like when the sun breaks, you've been partying the whole night or whatever it is, and there's a piece of sunlight over there, that's where you head after the whole night, just to kind of recover yourself. And I say to you, the one thing about you that might be interesting, I bet you've had this experience. You go somewhere you don't really even want to go. You sit there very quietly, say it's a party that you've been dragged to, and you're sitting very quietly in your little corner. By the time you go home, you've spoken to at least half the people there, and you didn't really do anything. You didn't get up and socialize. They all came to you like a little magnet. And the next thing, they were telling you their deepest, darkest. And that's what happens to people who've got the sun in the first. Because people feel safe and warm and a little bit enlightened, and out it pops. And she's got Scorpio everything, and she will hit the nail on the head. And she's a complete stranger, so they feel liberated. And that's why you need to get paid to do that. So that's what I mean by the ancients say we should all be prostitutes. Sell it. You were born that way. You might have to get a degree to be allowed to practice it, but you were born that way. And that will encourage her to make better use of Scorpio, of Pluto, of those kinds of things. The other context I always check on a few of the major transits or anything. It's important that if she's seeing me now, she's actually got Pluto on the moon squaring Mars. And I would also want to, I'd ask or expect that this might be why she's seeing an astrologer, because actually in her chart last year, was it Saturn was quite active. The whole Pluto-Saturn thing was building up in her chart. It was Uranus. It was Uranus and Neptune. It was Pluto and Neptune, as I'm just looking at the chart. It was Pluto and Neptune. Neptune was squaring a Venus. Pluto had started on the moon. And now this year carries that into the square of Mars. And there could have been a lot of change in her personal life. It could have been a difficult time emotionally or an intense time emotionally. And there could have been some changes in her personal life, perhaps even in her relationship or marriage if she is. So knowing that, I'd ask her, firstly, is there a reason that you come in, give her the space to say, I'm not going to pull it out of a hat. And then I would say, if she's given me nothing about any of that, I would want to also say, let's talk, having spoken about profession, let's talk about your personal life, because it does seem quite relevant right now. So I'll underline that it's extra. We'll talk about it anyway, but I'll say more about this moon and that kind of thing. But I'd get to the point that it's being very intensified at the moment, whether it's the melancholic aspect of this moon, and you need to be actually just breaking that a bit more. It could be that you're in a relationship that's making you melancholic, or that there's stuff happening in it that's making you melancholic, but something is changing in that area, or has recently changed. And that could be one of the reasons you're here. And I'm just getting a response eventually, for some reason, from her. What I want to get to is that now we're on to the Pluto square Mars part of the story, is that you've still got to kind of hang tight a bit until the end of the year. It might push you, it might get you into conflict. I do have to say that I benefited from one of the very, very first conferences I ever attended to. First time I was a professional, seen as a professional amongst others when I was quite young, sitting with a bunch of other English astrologers who were talking about Pluto as professionals and saying, you know, the one thing about Pluto is that 50% of the time it does absolutely nothing, but it comes right over something and does nothing to someone. And the other 50% of the time, it's Hiroshima. You know, it blows them right out of the water, because we all know when Pluto blows, it really blows like nothing else. And so and I always say it's because it's this dark, mysterious planet that sometimes creeps around behind you. You don't even realize it just did that, because that's exactly its nature. So I don't want to go too far down the Pluto square Mars. I do expect Pluto to the moon, the ascendants, or the sun always to be strong. But the Pluto square Mars, and her Mars is on the 12th house cusp, and it's detrimented. I don't want to drag it too far out into the light if it hasn't got there on its own. So I'll say, you know, it might be a time of more conflict or more frustration. And it's possible that if you're feeling frustrated, or in any way there's negative stuff happening, you could also be neglecting your health, because Pluto rules the 6th house cusp as well. And it rules the 1st house cusp. So I only use traditional rulership. It rules the 1st house cusp. So it rules you as a person and your body and your health and all of those. And with Mars, you know, stress-related things, headaches, clumsiness, that all comes out of things aren't working very well for you. So you need to pay attention to whether things could be affecting that. But it's a good time, and I'd encourage her, this is a time by taking care of her health, her diet, her stress levels, she can feel more empowered in her life, so that wherever there's conflict or change happening in her relationships, she can come from a stronger position and not get into unnecessary conflict or unnecessary vulnerability or those kind of things. But with Pluto as one of those planets in her chart especially, you could be talking about things that are really hard to change. So if it is going down the route of there is a relationship changing, I know Neptune is square Venus and Pluto square Mars, I know the chances are there's very little she can do about it, but I will still say to her, if you really want this relationship to work, this is the time you've got to work on it. But I'll tell you, as you I'm sure know, it's going to be really hard work. And I keep on getting her to meet me, so I'm never the one who's pouring karma on her as if she's meant to feel powerless. And letting her feel her way to me about how much are you willing or able to do about this. But still, hopefully, she's going away feeling what's happening is kind of supposed to happen. And I really must think about what I want, but I've got to accept that things are changing in X, Y, Z way, or whatever the case may be. Obviously, we'd also speak a lot more about emotional life, which is also very important to people in general. And, you know, her Venus is sextile Mars, and that's a great aspect, especially for this Mars who is ruled by Venus. And I'll interpret that as the ability to cooperate very well in a relationship to common goals. I'll say that can also be a strategy to make things work better. Mars is currently being frustrated, if this has turned out to be a relationship story, by Pluto, but her natal Venus-Mars thing means she's always got ways of creating common goals or making cooperations or something like that. But Pluto on the moon and Neptune square Venus will give us the chance to talk about whether things finally all fell apart, whether finally she realized she's allowing herself to be walked over, or whatever it might have been. Because moon and Capricorn people can accept a burdensome situation longer than they need to. And she can be in a difficult relationship longer than she needs to. So not let her get away with thinking, oh, okay, well, I'll just carry on cooperating if that's what the cooperation was. But certainly that there's still, if it really is working for you, but you know, hearing an astrologer talk about things, it takes the burden off people's shoulders because they realize it is true, it is real, and here's this person seeing it objectively, they don't know me. And so she doesn't feel so bad if she has to decide, I'm going to leave him or whatever, or that I've allowed him to walk all over me, or anything like that. By seeing it this way, she realizes it's okay. Those are the boundaries I was working with, and there is a way out of it. It might not be exactly the one I want, but there clearly is one. And where they can apply, where someone can apply their consciousness, they feel in charge of that.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Rod. Excuse me. The what I'm interested as well from your traditional perspective is that Mars is so important, being the ruler of the Scorpio stuff in the chart, the ascendant, the dispositor of three other planets, and it's being heavily aspected by Pluto and by Saturn, of course, and Jupiter at the moment. So, would your assumption, if there is an assumption, be that having Mars in Libra would have a particular way of responding to that? You've mentioned relationship, and I'm wondering whether that's the Mars and Libra link, but whether she's in more difficulty, it's going to be tougher because Mars is in Libra, and the ruler of all the Scorpio stuff. What would you feel about that?
What I was taught, I don't remember who taught me this, what I was taught about Mars in detriment was that Mars in Aries or Scorpio is like a soldier with a pistol who can aim exactly at what he needs to hit and hit it. And so it goes for the target, whatever he needs to do. Mars in Libra is more like an amateur who uses a machine gun and mows everything down to ensure that he hits the target. So collateral damage is one thing that's trying to talk about, or unnecessary is why I use the word unnecessary conflict. It's not going to advance the cause or make you win the something or anything like that. It's unnecessary, collateral, too much damage, but not, again, fall down damage. Machine gun is quite a strong word. Doesn't mean everyone gets killed, but it just means there's a lot of unnecessary complication. So things don't work out. I'm mostly concerned with what Mars rules as the ruler of the ascendant. So, in traditional astrology, you get taught that it's like that planet is that person. She is Mars. She's this Mars that finds it difficult to act as Mars. Doesn't mean that nothing else ever works, but it's difficult to act as Mars. It's difficult for her to assert her own self, her own needs, go for the goal, go for her stuff. Mars as her own Mars, as her own self. And the collateral damage can affect her health because that's on the 12th cusp. I use the 5-degree rule. Although birth times, I'll always ask a couple of questions to check on close houses like that. But accepting that it's in the 12th house for argument's sake, and it's the ruler of the 6th, I'll worry that she doesn't attend to physical problems or that she subverts them. 12th house can be hidden health problems as well. So I'd encourage her, simply, it's a great way to take charge of your life is to go and get a checkup. I won't diagnose her unless she specifically got me into that situation, came to me as a healer. I've got a qualification in herbalism in this country, and then fine, I can. But I'm not going to just spring that on her and frighten her, especially since astrology is not 100% reliable that way. It can just say something's wrong. We can't always say what it is. So I'd say it's a great time to get a check on especially things that are stress related or that you don't see because you're not keeping a check on yourself. And that lets her, she can decide her level of fear. There isn't a necessary reason to have one. And it just could be it's a good time to check because Mars can sometimes be trivial as well. So I'm not overly concerned and I'm giving her some power over it. But I do, as a traditional astrologer, I worry that it's her 1st and 6th house ruler. It's detrimented and it's under a lot of pressure. So at this time, however unchangeable things need to be, the way to spin this positively is not to say you could get sick right now, is rather to say the only thing that you are in charge of is your body. So take charge of that one while all hell breaks loose around you.
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you. Is there anything else that you'd like to say, or have you done what you need to do?
Well, I think, I always want a person to end the reading, not on the tangles of the problems or those kind of things. And I'll get back to the key point is, I might put it this way, that if I had to say, for some charts, you can say there is like one key that unlocks many doors. Not all charts will go that way, but there's a lot of similarity in many things said in this chart. So I'd say, actually, if there was a key that would unlock the doors, is to understand that you're a catalyst eagle. So if you're a catalyst, it's your job to change other people. When people don't respond to you well, you'll realize it's because I'm putting that in the wrong place. When you feel frustrated, you'll realize maybe I'm not making changes happen in the right way. When you feel underappreciated, you realize I'm letting them get away with not paying me because I can just do this anyway, or whatever. And just find ways, use your key and understand my key is this gift I have, is that I can catalyze change. I'm like an eagle. It's a dangerous animal, but it's an amazing animal. It's an amazing animal. So that's my key. I'll try and be the eagle. I'll try and use this catalyst thing as the thing I'm born with. And I'll try and be gracious when it causes trouble, when people don't understand me, when it hits the wall, and realize it's a key. It's only going to fit one lock. It's difficult to use, but I'll make my mission using it in all the right places and give her a sense of power over that Scorpio, which might have been so difficult when she was younger.
That sounds like a very positive summary and a way forward for her to leave. Because they say people remember 3 things in a reading or in a lecture at times, and sometimes you have to summarize them or at least give them 1 or 2 to go home with. Because there's a lot of information that is processed and not yet digested in a consultation, of course. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you again for supporting Tusk.org is the website for that. And for your expertise and sharing that. I really, really do appreciate you showing us a bit of what you do and being up for a blind chart challenge as well. So thank you so much, Rod. Really appreciate you being here.
It was a great pleasure. I really appreciate your invitation and the wonderful work you're doing with the teaching and with the charity work that this goes to. I appreciate getting a chance to make that contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Rod. Appreciate that. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.